The moment came quietly. Too quietly, some would argue. But inside the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, a storm was raging, one that would shake the very foundations of the modern monarchy. Meghan Markle, a woman who had navigated the prying eyes of the world, who had faced relentless scrutiny from tabloids, royal critics, and social media mobs, had just learned something that would leave her trembling in ways no public appearance ever could. Lady Louise Windsor, the poised and seemingly unassuming granddaughter of King Charles, was about to take over titles that Meghan once held, titles that defined her place in the royal family, her public standing, and, to some degree, her sense of self. And King Charles had made a final decision, irreversible, decisive, and shocking. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Can you imagine it? Everything you thought you had secured, everything you had fought for, suddenly slipping through your fingers? Titles aren't just names in the monarchy. They carry influence, prestige, and power. They dictate your role in the family, your responsibilities in the nation, and even your visibility to the world. For Meghan, losing them wasn't just symbolic. It was personal, public, and profoundly emotional. And yet, the world outside didn't see the tears, didn't hear the whispered disbelief. They only saw headlines. They only saw the smiling Duchess who, for years, had carried herself with poise amid controversy. But let's back up. Before this moment, Meghan had believed she was secure. She had her Duchess title, her public engagements, her charitable commitments, and a narrative carefully cultivated over years. She had, in her own words, carved a niche where she could be both royal and modern, both tradition-bound and progressive. And for the public, she was a figure of fascination, a magnet for attention, admiration, and, of course, criticism. Then came the news. Delivered quietly, without fanfare, and yet exploding inside her like a thunderclap. Lady Louise Windsor, young, graceful, and seemingly reserved, was stepping into the very roles Meghan had once occupied. The titles, the honors, the ceremonial duties that marked Meghan's position in the monarchy were being reassigned. And the decision had come directly from King Charles himself. Why now? Why Lady Louise? And why in such a manner that left Meghan blindsided? These questions would haunt not only Meghan but the palace staff, royal commentators, and a captivated public. For decades, the passing of titles in the royal family followed strict traditions, sometimes contested, often debated in private chambers, and always politically sensitive. But this moment felt different. Something in the timing, the manner, and the secrecy suggested more than just procedural formality. It hinted at a carefully orchestrated plan, one that some palace insiders had known about for weeks, even months. Imagine the scene. Meghan alone in a private room, perhaps in Kensington Palace or a secluded wing of Frogmore Cottage, reading a note, hearing a messenger, or simply being told face to face. The words hit her like ice water. Her face, often described as composed and controlled, betrayed the shock and hurt she felt. Eyes widening, breath catching. A sense of disbelief, mingled with anger, confusion, and betrayal. It wasn't just that Lady Louise was stepping into her titles. It was the implication that she, Meghan, had been quietly diminished, replaced in the hierarchy of the monarchy. The emotional weight of titles in the royal family cannot be overstated. They are markers of lineage, power, and authority. They dictate protocol, engagement schedules, and the way the media frames an individual. For Meghan, this loss meant more than ceremonial changes. It meant a reshaping of her identity, both publicly and privately. Every smile in a photograph, every handshake with dignitaries, every charitable initiative she led, suddenly, the lens through which the world viewed her would shift. Lady Louise, not Meghan, would now symbolize continuity, lineage, and the traditional monarchy. And yet, the story was far from simple. Because King Charles's decision was not made in a vacuum. The palace is a web of intrigue, a labyrinth of advisors, aides, and confidants whose whispers shape monumental choices. Some say it was the culmination of years of planning. Others insist it was a reaction to Meghan's public statements, interviews, and perceived influence over the monarchy's image. Either way, the decision was final. Charles had spoken, and the ripple effects were already being felt. Outside the walls of Buckingham Palace, the world remained unaware of the private anguish. The tabloids would eventually capture snippets, but no photograph could fully convey the intensity of Meghan's reaction. There were no cameras rolling, no microphone capturing the quiet moment when her reality shifted. Yet, for those who know the inner workings of the royal family, moments like this define the human side of monarchy, where lineage and tradition collide with modernity, emotion, and personal ambition. The curious thing about titles is that they carry both respect and expectation. They are privileges, but also responsibilities. And losing them, especially in a public way, is humiliating, even if done discreetly. Meghan, who had faced relentless public scrutiny, was suddenly confronted with a new narrative, one that she had no control over. She had built an image, carved a role, and worked tirelessly to balance royal duties with personal projects. And now, the story the world would eventually hear would frame her as being replaced, overshadowed, and sidelined. Some argue this was inevitable. After all, Lady Louise is a granddaughter of the king, a member of the traditional line, and, in many ways, a figure the monarchy could mold without controversy. Meghan, by contrast, represents both change and challenge. She challenges norms, questions traditions, and refuses to blend into an expected mold. And while that made her a fascinating public figure, it also made her a lightning rod in private corridors. Perhaps, then, the reassignment of titles was less about her capabilities and more about maintaining the monarchy's carefully curated image. But let's not assume it was simply politics. The human element cannot be ignored. Meghan is not merely a title holder. She is a woman with aspirations, pride, and a deeply personal connection to her identity. To lose titles, regardless of ceremonial importance, is to experience a form of erasure. A public reminder that no matter the work, the influence, or the visibility, certain positions are bound by blood, not by merit, not by ambition. And in that realization, Meghan's breakdown becomes not only understandable, but inevitable. Now, consider the broader implications. When a royal title changes hands, it's more than a private matter. It affects charities, patronages, and public events. It shifts media attention. It alters the narrative around the monarchy. The people who watched Meghan in her roles, who admired her work, who supported her initiatives, would now redirect attention to Lady Louise. Meghan's visibility diminishes, while Lady Louise ascends. And all of this, orchestrated quietly, behind closed doors, reveals the power dynamics and calculated decisions of King Charles and his inner circle. And yet, there is tension. For Meghan, the emotional toll is compounded by the lack of transparency, the secrecy, and the timing. She was not prepared. She had not been consulted. She was simply told, your titles, your roles, your ceremonial authority, transferred, and the person now holding them. Lady Louise, who, while gracious and respected, was seen publicly as an innocent bystander in this intricate power play. It's easy to imagine the conversation. Meghan, composed yet shaking, asking questions. Why? How? What about my commitments? And King Charles, firm, decisive, and unyielding, offering explanations rooted in tradition, protocol, and the long-term vision of the monarchy. The words, delivered with authority, likely felt cold, even if intended as impartial. They left Meghan grappling with emotions too complex to articulate. Hurt, disbelief, a sense of betrayal, and an acute awareness of her diminishing role. And for those of us watching from the outside, it's a reminder of the duality of royal life. Glamour and protocol, public adoration and private heartbreak, tradition and modernity, all collide in moments like this. Meghan's story, while uniquely hers, echoes through the corridors of history, where countless royal figures have faced similar crossroads. Yet the public rarely sees the private anguish, the heartbreak behind a poised smile. By now, you might be wondering, what does Meghan do next? How does she navigate a world where titles, respect, and visibility are slipping through her fingers? Who are her allies? And who are quietly celebrating her diminished role? And perhaps most importantly, how does King Charles justify a decision that would, for many, seem both shocking and unprecedented? These questions linger, forming a cloud of anticipation, curiosity, and emotional tension. And as we delve deeper into this story, you'll see that the official decision is only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the headlines, there are letters, private conversations, advisor strategies, and personal reflections that have never been made public until now. Because while Lady Louise prepares to step into her new role, Meghan's reaction and the events that follow will reveal truths about the monarchy that the public rarely sees. Secrets, betrayals, strategies, and human emotion, all entwined in a narrative that is as dramatic as it is unprecedented. But what Meghan didn't know at that moment would change everything, and no one outside these palace walls saw it coming. What is a title worth when the world is watching, when history is recording every gesture, every smile, every slip of the tongue? In the monarchy, a title is never just a word. It is a badge of authority, a symbol of lineage, and a passport to influence. For Meghan Markle, those words had once carried prestige, power, and a sense of belonging. Now, with Lady Louise Windsor stepping into her roles, the weight of that loss was immediate, visceral, and undeniable. Think about it. Titles in the royal family are carefully calibrated. They mark rank, determine access to ceremonial events, and delineate who speaks first, who is seated where, who represents the crown. They are markers of history, linking the present to centuries of tradition. And yet, they are also intensely personal. They shape identity, guide public perception, and for those who hold them, define a life's trajectory. To lose a title is to lose a part of yourself, a part that others see, admire, and, in many ways, judge. For Meghan, this reality hit like a tidal wave. She had entered the royal family not as a princess by birth, but as a duchess by marriage, an outsider who quickly became one of the most visible members of the monarchy. Her title had allowed her access to charities, influence over public engagements, and a platform from which she could enact change. But with Lady Louise poised to inherit her ceremonial space, those privileges were slipping from her grasp, almost imperceptibly at first, then with increasing certainty. Consider the historical context. The title of Duchess of Sussex was more than a courtesy. It was a carefully constructed role, designed to integrate Meghan into the fabric of the monarchy while preserving the established line of succession. It symbolized her marriage, her responsibilities, and her expected contributions to royal duties. Losing that title was not just about protocol, it was about erasure. It was about being quietly nudged to the margins, removed from the spotlight she had occupied with grace, resilience, and, some would argue, considerable skill. And yet, Lady Louise's ascension was, on the surface, entirely natural. She is, after all, the granddaughter of King Charles, a member of the direct lineage, someone the monarchy could present without controversy, without the media frenzy that has long surrounded Meghan. To the public eye, it looks seamless, almost mundane. But beneath the polished veneer, tension simmers. Because Meghan's removal from this role was not merely about succession, it was about control, optics, and the subtle recalibration of royal influence. What makes this so emotionally charged is that Meghan had invested deeply in her role. Every engagement, every patronage, every carefully curated public appearance was a testament to her commitment. Losing the title meant losing the platform she had worked tirelessly to maintain. It meant stepping aside from spaces she had fought to occupy, spaces where her voice, influence, and identity had been firmly established. And the swiftness with which Lady Louise took her place only amplified the sting. There was no time to adjust, no opportunity to protest or negotiate. Just a quiet, irrevocable transfer of privilege. Now, let's pause and consider the audience watching this unfold. How does the world perceive this shift? To many, Lady Louise represents continuity, tradition, and the stability of monarchy. Meghan, on the other hand, embodies modernity, disruption, and, some would argue, a challenge to established norms. The juxtaposition is stark. One is celebrated for blending seamlessly into the royal framework. The other is scrutinized for daring to redefine it. And in that scrutiny lies the heart of Meghan's emotional turmoil. She is not just losing titles. She is losing validation, recognition, and the very platform through which she had sought to make a mark. The palace, of course, has its own calculus. Decisions about titles are rarely impulsive. They are measured, debated, and strategically timed. Advisors, private secretaries, and the inner circle of the monarchy play key roles in shaping outcomes. King Charles's choice to pass titles to Lady Louise was likely influenced by considerations of optics, precedent, and long-term stability. But for Meghan, the human side of that calculation, the feelings of being displaced, marginalized, and undervalued, was unavoidable. Protocol may dictate the transfer of power, but it cannot erase the emotional impact. And let's not forget the symbolism inherent in these titles. When Meghan held her Duchess title, it signaled inclusion, respect, and prominence within the royal hierarchy. When Lady Louise assumes it, the signal shifts. The spotlight moves, the narrative changes, and the subtle dynamics of attention and influence are redirected. Meghan is still a duchess by courtesy of her marriage, but the ceremonial authority, the public-facing role, the recognition that comes with active titles, those are now in Lady Louise's hands. It is, in essence, a public demotion cloaked in tradition. The emotional beat here is palpable. Meghan is a figure who has already navigated intense public scrutiny, relentless media speculation, and the pressures of an institution steeped in history and expectation. To face this loss, now, quietly and without recourse, is to confront a kind of personal and professional betrayal. Not a betrayal in the traditional sense, perhaps, but a recalibration of value, influence, and recognition. It forces reflection on identity, purpose, and belonging. Yet, there is also a strategic component to this story. Meghan's reaction, private and hidden from the public eye, is part of a larger narrative that the palace must manage carefully. If her dismay becomes public, it could shift public opinion, fuel speculation, and challenge the intended optics of the transfer. The monarchy thrives on controlled narratives, and every emotional ripple must be considered, contained, or redirected. For Meghan, this means that even her feelings are under scrutiny. Even her humanity is weighed against the expectations of tradition and ceremony. Now, consider Lady Louise in this context. She is young, poised, and prepared to step into a role that carries immense weight. Publicly, she appears calm, composed, and ready. But privately, she is stepping into a legacy not of her making, and into a position that has been, in some ways, contested by circumstance. The contrast between Meghan's struggle and Lady Louise's seamless ascension underscores the tension inherent in the monarchy, one where tradition, lineage, and optics often outweigh merit, ambition, or personal investment. And there's more to unpack. Titles are also closely tied to media perception. Meghan has been one of the most scrutinized royals of her generation. Every move, outfit, and engagement has been dissected, praised, or criticized. Losing titles amplifies this scrutiny, not by removing her from the public eye entirely, but by shifting the narrative. The media will inevitably frame Lady Louise as the natural, deserving successor. Meghan's absence from these roles will be noted, speculated upon, and sensationalized. Her personal disappointment becomes fodder for public consumption, and every headline reinforces the transfer of power she is grappling with privately. Furthermore, the ripple effects extend beyond visibility. Charitable engagements, patronages, and ceremonial duties, all intertwined with the titles she once held, are now reassigned. Relationships forged over years with organizations, advocates, and the public are disrupted. Meghan's influence, carefully cultivated and nurtured, is suddenly limited by the same structures that once elevated her. And while titles may seem symbolic, in reality, they are gateways to action, advocacy, and leadership. Losing them is, therefore, both symbolic and practical, a double blow that reverberates across personal and public spheres. And yet, the most striking aspect is the human story beneath it all. Meghan's journey has been one of resilience, adaptability, and courage. She has weathered storms, confronted criticism, and carved a place for herself within an institution that is often unforgiving. To face this latest challenge, the quiet, sudden transfer of her titles to Lady Louise demands a reckoning not just with the monarchy, but with her own identity, self-worth, and place in the world. It is a deeply personal, emotionally charged moment, and one that is as relatable as it is extraordinary. Who among us hasn't faced the pain of being sidelined, overlooked, or replaced in a role we cherished? And so, as the news settles, the palace corridors remain buzzing with quiet anticipation. Advisors whisper, communications circulate, and King Charles's decision, though final, is felt in every corner. For Meghan, it is the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by loss, adaptation, and the ongoing struggle for recognition. For Lady Louise, it is a moment of ascent, responsibility, and scrutiny. And for the world watching, it is a story of drama, power, and the intricate dance of tradition and modernity within one of the most iconic royal families on earth. But just as Meghan begins to process the magnitude of what has happened, a whispered message arrives, one that hints at secrets, strategies, and insider maneuvers she had no idea were in motion. A message that will force her to question not only the decision itself, but the intentions behind it. And in that instant, the story becomes even more complicated, because in the monarchy, nothing is ever quite as simple as it seems. What happens when the most powerful decision-maker in the monarchy makes a choice that shakes the very structure of royal life? King Charles's decision to reassign Meghan's titles to Lady Louise Windsor wasn't made casually. It wasn't a whim or a fleeting thought during a lunch in Buckingham Palace. No, this was a carefully orchestrated move, calculated with the precision of a chess grandmaster, factoring in history, tradition, optics, and the delicate balance of family dynamics. And yet, for Meghan, the world outside the palace would only ever see the tip of the iceberg, the final decree, the formal announcement, the public-facing narrative. But behind those closed doors, the story was far more intricate, far more human, and far more charged than any public statement could convey. To truly understand the impact of King Charles's decision, one must first imagine the labyrinthine corridors of power within the monarchy. Advisors whisper in private chambers. Secretaries compile reports, outlining every potential consequence of a single action. Legal experts weigh precedent. Courtiers consider public perception. Every word, every gesture, every timing is meticulously scrutinized. And in the center of it all sits the king, the arbiter of tradition, protocol, and familial authority. Consider the weight of responsibility. Charles isn't merely deciding on ceremonial titles. He is shaping narratives, influencing the media, directing the course of public opinion, and, most importantly, signaling to the royal family where power truly lies. A misstep could create rifts, ignite scandals, and dominate headlines for months, if not years. This is the calculus the king must navigate every day. And in the case of Meghan Markle, the stakes were unprecedented. When the decision was finally made, King Charles knew it would ripple far beyond the immediate parties involved. He knew the press would seize upon the story, framing it as a dramatic upheaval in the royal hierarchy. He knew social media would dissect every nuance of Meghan's public persona, speculating on her reaction, her next move, her influence lost or regained. And yet, behind the official decision lay a web of conversations, letters, and private deliberations that the public would never fully see. Imagine the meeting itself. A quiet room somewhere in the palace, perhaps with heavy drapes muted against the afternoon sun, a polished table, and chairs carefully placed in the symmetry of protocol. Advisors stand just outside, ready to intervene if needed, but not intruding. The king, composed yet resolute, sits with documents in front of him. Dossiers detailing Meghan's engagements, her patronages, her public impact, and the delicate history of titles within the family. He weighs the balance, continuity versus change, tradition versus modernity, family harmony versus public perception. And Meghan? Was she informed in person or through intermediaries? Accounts vary, but the consensus among insiders is that she learned in a private setting, one designed to maintain dignity while asserting authority. The words themselves, though polite, were unambiguous. Her titles were being reassigned. Lady Louise was to assume them. The reasons cited: lineage, protocol, and the long-term vision of the monarchy. No room for negotiation. No space for reinterpretation. Just the finality of royal command. For Meghan, the emotional impact was immediate. There is no public record of the private tears, the quiet swallowing of anger, or the moments of disbelief. But those closest to her describe a woman grappling with the sudden removal of identity, influence, and role. Titles in the monarchy are intertwined with public presence, charitable influence, and personal validation. To lose them quietly, yet irrevocably, is to face a profound form of erasure. And Meghan, having built her position with careful strategy, public engagement, and personal investment, felt that loss keenly. But let's not reduce this to emotion alone. The king's decision had layers of strategy. Advisors emphasized that the timing was critical. The public narrative was being carefully managed to ensure that Lady Louise's ascension appeared seamless, dignified, and natural. By minimizing public knowledge of Meghan's private reaction, the monarchy could maintain the appearance of order and tradition. In other words, even as Meghan processed her dismay, the optics were being choreographed elsewhere. Her pain, invisible to the public, became a backdrop to a larger narrative of stability and continuity. And yet, there is contradiction here. King Charles, known for his desire to modernize certain aspects of the monarchy, simultaneously adheres to centuries-old traditions when they serve stability. The reassignment of titles reflects this duality. On one hand, he is progressive, aware of the scrutiny, the need to adapt, the importance of Meghan's role in modernizing public perception. On the other, he is conservative, valuing lineage, protocol, and the symbolic power of titles. The result is a tension, one that Meghan is forced to navigate without the luxury of explanation or recourse. Consider also the human dimension beyond Meghan and Lady Louise. Advisors, courtiers, and family members all play roles in shaping and responding to this decision. Who supported it privately? Who resisted it quietly? There are whispers of palace factions aligning along lines of tradition versus innovation, insiders advocating for protocol, others urging consideration of Meghan's contributions. Every recommendation carries weight, but ultimately, the king's judgment is final. And here lies the fascinating part, the layers of secrecy. Official statements and public ceremonies reveal only a fraction of the reality. Behind the scenes, there are letters exchanged, private memos drafted, and conversations conducted in hushed tones. Some advisors reportedly warned about the potential backlash. Others argued for transparency, while yet others prioritized the optics of lineage above all else. And Meghan, caught in the middle, had to process not only the loss but the subtle betrayals and alliances forming in real time around her. One insider recalls a particular moment, a private note, handed discreetly to Meghan, outlining the official rationale. The language is formal, almost cold: lineage, protocol, continuity. There is no acknowledgement of her contributions, her emotional investment, or her public work, just the unflinching assertion of the monarchy's priorities. Imagine receiving a document like that, not in a moment of ceremony, but in quiet, private, almost isolating circumstances. The weight of it is crushing, not just in terms of role, but in terms of recognition. And the symbolism extends further. Titles in the monarchy are markers of stability. Passing them quietly to Lady Louise signals continuity to the public, ensuring that the perception of order remains intact. It's a strategic move, one designed to minimize disruption in public perception while recalibrating internal hierarchies. For Meghan, the subtleties of strategy, optics, and protocol may offer little consolation against the personal sting of displacement. The narrative is complicated by the fact that Meghan has historically been vocal about her desire to modernize, to challenge outdated norms, and to use her platform for advocacy. In a way, her very visibility may have hastened this decision. To consolidate traditional authority, to ensure that lineage and protocol take precedence over individual ambition, the reassignment of titles serves a dual purpose. It stabilizes the family hierarchy and sends a clear message about the boundaries of influence. And yet, even as King Charles's decision is final, the story is far from over. Meghan's private reactions, her allies' interventions, and the subtle shifts within palace dynamics suggest that this is only the opening chapter of a larger saga. There are letters yet to be revealed, conversations yet to be analyzed, and decisions yet to be made. The public may see only the ceremonial handover, but the emotional, political, and strategic consequences will reverberate for months, even years. Imagine the implications. Patronages change hands. Public events are reassigned. Media narratives are recalibrated. Every photograph, every public appearance, every press release now carries the weight of this decision. Meghan's visibility diminishes in direct proportion to Lady Louise's rise. And for those who study the monarchy, The internal calculations reveal a delicate balancing act, honoring tradition, managing public perception, and maintaining family unity, all while navigating unprecedented personal dynamics. And then there's the human curiosity. What did Meghan think in those first moments? Shock, disbelief, quiet anger, strategic contemplation? Was she calculating a response, or merely absorbing the reality of her diminished role? Reports suggest a combination of all. Advisors note that she is both resilient and fiercely protective of her public image, meaning that even as she experiences private dismay, she considers carefully how to respond publicly, or whether to respond at all. But just as Meghan begins to process the magnitude of King Charles's decision, an unexpected communication arrives, a whispered message from a palace insider suggesting that there may be more to this reassignment than meets the eye. A secret meeting, an overlooked document, an unspoken clause, something that challenges not only the decision itself, but the motivations behind it. And suddenly, what seemed final and absolute begins to feel like the opening act in a story that is far from resolved. What do you do when the world seems to shift beneath your feet and nothing feels secure anymore? For Meghan Markle, the reassignment of her titles to Lady Louise Windsor was more than a procedural change. It was a deeply personal blow. Titles in the monarchy are not just words. They are identity, authority, visibility, and influence. Losing them quietly, behind closed doors, was like having a part of her public and private self erased in an instant. Imagine her in the solitude of a private wing of her residence, perhaps in Frogmore Cottage or a secluded room within Kensington Palace. The doors are closed, the outside world oblivious, and yet the silence is deafening. For someone who has spent years navigating the public eye, enduring scrutiny, and balancing the expectations of tradition with modernity, this private moment of shock is almost unbearable. The news hits like a tidal wave, rolling over her carefully constructed world. Her hands shake slightly, heart racing. The weight of the announcement presses down with suffocating intensity. Meghan's emotional response was both immediate and complex. There is anger, a raw, visceral anger that pulses through every fiber of her being. How could this happen without warning? She might ask herself, though no one is there to hear. There is disbelief, a mental resistance to accepting that everything she has worked for, every engagement, every effort to carve a meaningful role, is suddenly being diminished. And there is a deep, gnawing sadness, a mourning not just for titles lost, but for the identity and validation those titles represented. It is in these moments that Meghan's private humanity becomes visible, not to the cameras, not to the world, but to those few she trusts. Close confidants have reportedly witnessed the depth of her despair, the quiet moments of tears behind closed doors, the way she clutches a letter or document as if it might anchor her in reality. These are the images the public will never see. The human being behind the Duchess, grappling with loss, betrayal, and the acute pain of diminished status. And yet, even in her breakdown, Meghan's resilience is evident. She is a woman who has faced relentless criticism, who has been vilified, celebrated, and scrutinized with equal intensity. This is not her first encounter with adversity, but the personal nature of this loss cuts deeper than anything public. Titles, after all, are markers of not just position, but purpose. They open doors, define responsibilities, and offer a sense of place in an institution that is rigid, hierarchical, and deeply traditional. To have that reallocated without consultation is to face a profound existential challenge. Who am I if the symbols that define me are removed? Consider the psychological weight of such a moment. Meghan has been navigating public life at the highest stakes for years, balancing the expectations of the monarchy with the scrutiny of global audiences. She has cultivated a persona that is polished, controlled, and strategic. And yet, in the private sphere, she is suddenly stripped of that control. The very titles that reinforced her public identity, legitimized her contributions, and anchored her sense of belonging have been quietly removed. It is a jarring realization, one that brings vulnerability into stark relief. Her breakdown also illuminates the tension between public expectation and private reality. Outwardly, Meghan has always presented herself with poise, strength, and unwavering composure. The cameras, the tabloids, and social media all see a controlled, calculated image, a duchess navigating the pressures of royalty with elegance. But behind closed doors, that carefully curated image collides with the raw, unfiltered reality of human emotion. Anger, sadness, and disbelief intermingle with strategic contemplation. How should she respond? Should she fight privately? Should she act publicly? Or should she absorb the loss and recalibrate her approach? The timing and manner of the decision also compound the emotional impact. It was deliberate, quiet, and final, leaving Meghan little room to process before the shift became official. The lack of consultation, the absence of dialogue, and the formal, impersonal delivery of the news amplify feelings of isolation. Even allies within the palace, those who might provide guidance or comfort, are constrained by protocol, hierarchy, and their own roles in the institution. Meghan faces the loss largely alone, navigating a labyrinth of emotion, expectation, and political calculation. It is also worth noting the layers of irony and contradiction. Meghan, who has worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy's image, who has embraced public engagement and philanthropic work, now finds herself sidelined not because of failure, but because of lineage and tradition. Her contributions, her visibility, her strategic efforts, all acknowledged yet overshadowed by a system that prioritizes bloodlines over merit. The clash between modernity and tradition is never starker than in this moment, highlighting the enduring tension that defines the royal institution. And the heartbreak is not abstract, it is deeply personal. Each ceremonial role, each public engagement, each recognition she had received suddenly takes on a bittersweet quality. Events she once led or participated in will now be associated with Lady Louise. Charities and patronages she nurtured may shift attention. Photographs, headlines, and media narratives will quietly reframe the story. Her legacy, as she perceived it, is being rewritten without her consent. The private pain is immense, but the public consequences are inevitable. As Meghan processes this, the human element becomes even more striking. There is the sense of betrayal, not necessarily from individuals, but from an institution that governs with invisible rules and unspoken expectations. There is anger at the absence of consultation, frustration at the procedural inevitability, and grief over the sudden erasure of influence. And yet, there is also strategic thinking. Meghan is acutely aware of the optics, the narratives, and the broader implications of any reaction. She must balance emotion with calculation, grief with resilience, and private sorrow with public composure. Reports suggest that during this period, Meghan confided in a select few, trusted friends who understood both the public and private stakes. These confidants witnessed her vulnerability, but also her fierce determination. Despite the breakdown, there was a spark of resolve, a recognition that while titles may be reassigned, influence can be reclaimed, narratives can be shaped, and presence can be asserted through channels beyond ceremonial designation. It is a moment of transformation, one where grief coexists with strategy and loss is tempered by the potential for reinvention. And yet, the emotional intensity cannot be understated. Meghan, a woman who has consistently navigated scrutiny, criticism, and the pressures of fame and duty, faces a form of personal erasure that even the harshest public commentary could not deliver. Titles are symbolic, but they are also deeply tied to identity, authority, and self-perception. Losing them suddenly, without consultation or warning, is a profound shock to both personal and professional equilibrium. As she grapples with this reality, the breakdown is punctuated by flashes of anger, disbelief, and quiet contemplation. There are moments of private tears, silences filled with the weight of what has been lost, and the urgent mental calculations of next steps. How does one maintain dignity in the face of such erasure? How does one respond to a decision that feels both final and strategically motivated? How does one protect both personal integrity and public image when the very symbols of authority have been reassigned? And just when Meghan begins to settle into the quiet storm of her emotions, a subtle intrusion shatters the fragile balance. A message, perhaps a note slipped under a door or a whispered communication from a trusted insider, hints that there may be more to this story than the official decision reveals. Details overlooked, conversations unrecorded, intentions hidden. Suddenly, The seemingly final reassignment of titles becomes a complex puzzle. Meghan's private breakdown is interrupted not by closure, but by the revelation that the narrative is far from complete. In that instant, the emotional weight of loss is compounded by the spark of intrigue. What was really behind King Charles's decision? Who influenced it? What messages were sent in secret and which remain hidden? Meghan realizes that this is not merely about titles. It is about power, influence, and the subtle machinations of an institution that thrives on secrecy, control, and tradition. And as the emotional storm continues, Meghan begins to confront a profound truth. Her journey within the monarchy is far from over. Titles may shift, influence may be reallocated, and public narratives may be reframed, but her agency, her determination, and her ability to navigate these treacherous waters remain intact. The breakdown, as raw and devastating as it is, becomes a crucible, a place where resilience is forged, strategies are contemplated, and the next moves are quietly plotted. But just as Meghan starts to gather herself, a revelation surfaces, an overlooked letter, a whispered conversation, a hidden motive that promises to upend not only her understanding of the decision, but the very dynamics of power within the palace. And in that moment, the private breakdown transforms into the first step of a larger, more complex story, one that will unfold behind doors, in whispers, and ultimately, before the world. Who is Lady Louise Windsor, the quiet, composed figure stepping into the very roles Meghan Markle once held? At first glance, she seems unassuming, almost serene. A young royal who has grown up under the strictures and privileges of monarchy, groomed with care and observation, yet rarely the subject of public frenzy. And now, with King Charles's decisive reassignment of titles, she is poised to inherit the ceremonial, public, and symbolic authority that had belonged to Meghan. But beneath the polished exterior lies a story both compelling and intricate, a story that the public has yet to fully grasp. Consider the contrast between Meghan and Lady Louise. Meghan arrived in the royal family with a spotlight already shining on her. She was a public figure, an actress, a woman with a career, opinions, and a global platform. Her engagement with the monarchy represented a merging of modern celebrity and centuries-old tradition, a fusion that excited some and alarmed others. Lady Louise, by contrast, has spent her life largely within the private corridors of royal life. She embodies tradition, lineage, and continuity. Her public appearances are measured, controlled, and infrequent. She is, in many ways, the ideal candidate to inherit titles without provoking controversy. But what does this shift mean for the monarchy and for Meghan? The optics are clear. Lady Louise represents stability, tradition, and the consolidation of power within the bloodline. For the public, it is seamless. For Meghan, it is a personal and emotional blow. Every role she had nurtured, every public engagement she had led, is being reassigned to someone whose very upbringing symbolizes the continuity of royal tradition. The contrast could not be starker. On one hand, a modern, visible, proactive duchess. On the other, a reserved, lineage-based successor poised to step quietly into prominence. Yet Lady Louise's ascension is not simply a matter of optics or lineage. It is strategic, deliberate, and multifaceted. Advisors within the palace recognize the importance of presenting her as poised, competent, and prepared. Every public engagement, every ceremonial duty, is choreographed to reinforce her suitability. And while Meghan has faced constant scrutiny, Lady Louise's approach, measured, discreet, and tradition-oriented, aligns seamlessly with the monarchy's preferred narrative. It is a story of controlled progression, one that emphasizes continuity while quietly minimizing disruption. There is also an emotional and psychological dimension to consider. Lady Louise, though young, is stepping into responsibilities that demand poise, diligence, and awareness of public perception. She must navigate ceremonial duties, media attention, and the scrutiny that comes with visibility, all while maintaining the image of a competent and composed royal. Unlike Meghan, whose roles were often framed through the lens of celebrity, Lady Louise's public perception is tied to lineage, education, and adherence to tradition. She is, in essence, the monarchy's ideal successor in these symbolic roles, someone who can embody stability, while the family recalibrates its public image. Yet, there are subtleties the public rarely sees. Behind the calm exterior, Lady Louise has grown up observing the pressures and expectations of royal life firsthand. She has witnessed her family navigate scandals, media scrutiny, and the intricate interplay of protocol and personal desire. This upbringing has prepared her for the delicate balance of visibility and discretion, allowing her to step into roles with both competence and strategic awareness. Unlike Meghan, who had to adapt rapidly to royal expectations, Lady Louise has been groomed for continuity from birth. And there is irony here. While Meghan has fought to modernize the monarchy, to bring visibility and advocacy to her roles, Lady Louise steps into those positions embodying tradition and quiet authority. The public may perceive this as a natural handover, a seamless transition, but the implications are profound. Titles that once represented Meghan's influence now serve to reinforce the monarchy's preference for lineage and stability. It is a calculated move, one that subtly shifts the balance of visibility, power, and narrative control. There is also a curious tension in the comparison. Meghan, with her charisma, advocacy, and media presence, reshaped expectations of what a duchess could be. Lady Louise, by contrast, represents continuity and predictability. And in the reassignment of titles, the monarchy sends a clear message. While innovation and public engagement are valued, lineage and protocol remain paramount. It is a delicate message, crafted to preserve authority while mitigating potential disruption. But let's not overlook the personal stakes for Lady Louise herself. This is a pivotal moment in her life, one that carries both opportunity and pressure. She is stepping into a role that commands attention, visibility, and responsibility. Every public appearance, every ceremonial duty, and every photograph will be scrutinized. Her actions will be interpreted as reflective of not just her personal capabilities, but of the monarchy's judgment and foresight. It is a position that demands composure, awareness, and strategic understanding, qualities that, despite her youth, she has been cultivated to display. And then there is the ripple effect on Meghan. Watching someone else assume roles she had invested in, seeing the public narrative shift, and understanding the strategic logic behind the decision compounds the emotional impact. It is one thing to lose a title. It is another to witness the embodiment of what was once yours being claimed by someone else. The juxtaposition is stark, a reminder of both personal loss and the broader machinations of an institution that prioritizes continuity above all else. What makes this succession particularly fascinating is the subtlety of Lady Louise's rise. There is no dramatic announcement, no public confrontation, no fanfare. She steps quietly, almost imperceptibly, into her new responsibilities. Yet every move is deliberate. Every engagement reinforces the narrative of suitability, competence, and poise. And while Meghan's public image is shaped by past controversies and intense scrutiny, Lady Louise's is curated to emphasize grace, lineage, and understated authority. It is, in many ways, a lesson in perception, strategy, and the enduring power of symbolism within the monarchy. And while Lady Louise's ascension may appear seamless, it is not without challenges. Stepping into titles previously held by someone as visible and dynamic as Meghan carries its own pressures. Expectations are heightened. Comparisons are inevitable. And the subtle dynamics of palace politics, alliances, whispered opinions, and internal rivalries create a backdrop of complexity that she must navigate carefully. Every decision, every public appearance, every smile is measured against precedent and expectation. Yet there is also opportunity. With Meghan's reassignment of titles, Lady Louise gains not only visibility, but influence. Patronages, ceremonial duties, and public engagements offer platforms to shape perception, build relationships, and cultivate a distinct identity within the monarchy. While Meghan's loss is poignant, Lady Louise's gain represents potential, preparation, and the careful exercise of inherited authority. And this is where the intrigue deepens. The public sees a composed young royal stepping into her roles with grace. The media celebrates the continuity. The monarchy emphasizes stability. But behind the scenes, there are questions that remain unanswered. What role did advisors play in smoothing the transition? Were there subtle pressures applied to expedite Meghan's reassignment? How did King Charles weigh public perception against familial dynamics? These layers of strategy, influence, and subtle negotiation add depth to an otherwise straightforward narrative. And as Lady Louise prepares to assume her new roles, Meghan's private reckoning continues. The juxtaposition of public celebration and personal loss intensifies the drama. It is a story of contrasts: youth versus experience, tradition versus innovation, quiet composure versus public scrutiny. And while the titles have officially changed hands, the emotional and strategic ramifications are only beginning to unfold. But just as Lady Louise steps forward into the spotlight, a new complication emerges: an overlooked conversation, a palace memo, or a strategic suggestion that threatens to shift not only the narrative of succession, but the dynamics of influence, power, and control within the royal family. And suddenly, the story becomes more than just a handover of titles. It becomes a complex drama of strategy, emotion, and the delicate art of navigating one of the most scrutinized institutions in the world. What really happens behind the gilded walls of the palace, away from cameras, public appearances, and carefully curated statements? If you think the monarchy is just ceremonial processions, polished speeches, and elegant photo ops, think again. Beneath the surface lies a complex web of politics, influence, and hidden agendas. Alliances forged quietly, rivalries simmering in whispers, and decisions shaped by motives that few outsiders ever see. And Meghan Markle, now stripped of her titles, is smack in the middle of it. Palace politics is a game unlike any other. Every action, every suggestion, and every word carries weight. Advisors, secretaries, courtiers, and family members all have stakes in how the monarchy is perceived and how authority is exercised. Some advocate for tradition, valuing lineage, protocol, and the careful maintenance of hierarchy. Others push for modernization, visibility, and the strategic use of celebrity influence. When these forces collide, the outcomes can be dramatic and sometimes devastating. In Meghan's case, her removal from titles was not a simple administrative decision. It was the culmination of months, perhaps years, of careful maneuvering. Courtiers reportedly debated the optics of her influence, weighing her public appeal against the potential disruption to traditional hierarchy. Advisors considered every possible ripple effect: media reaction, public sentiment, internal family dynamics, and even the potential for legal challenges. Each recommendation carried nuance, subtle persuasion, and the unspoken expectation that the king would weigh it all against his ultimate goal: preserving the monarchy's image while maintaining family unity. And yet, within these corridors of influence, not everyone agrees. Palace insiders hint at factions, some aligned with strict tradition, others quietly championing Meghan's contributions. Some advisors reportedly feared that allowing her to retain full ceremonial authority could set a precedent for modernizing influence within the monarchy, while others recognized her public engagement as a force for goodwill and connection with the world. Every conversation, every note, every meeting became a chess move in a game where the stakes are centuries of tradition and personal ambition alike. Think about the subtlety of power in such an environment. A whispered comment in a hallway, a strategically placed memo, a private recommendation to the king. All of these can influence outcomes as much as formal meetings or official announcements. And for Meghan, navigating these waters was a challenge unlike any she had faced before. She was used to public scrutiny, yes, but this was different: private, insidious, and often invisible to the eyes of the world. It is one thing to endure headlines. It is another to feel the weight of calculated decisions made in secret, shaping your very role without your input. There were reportedly private discussions about timing, phrasing, and the order of announcements. Advisors debated the optics of Lady Louise's rise, how best to present her as poised and prepared, and how to minimize questions about Meghan's reassignment. Every detail, from public appearances to press releases, was designed to convey stability while subtly reinforcing the hierarchy the monarchy sought to maintain. For Meghan, it was a lesson in the quiet, relentless machinery of palace politics. Influence is never absolute, and even titles can be leveraged, reassigned, and controlled to serve strategic purposes. And then there are the interpersonal dynamics. Family relationships in the palace are not just about affection or loyalty. They are intertwined with expectations, duties, and power structures. Meghan's relationship with other members of the royal family became entangled in this decision. How much influence did Prince Harry exert privately? Were siblings and cousins involved in discussions, either overtly or behind the scenes? Did Lady Louise herself know the full extent of the deliberations, or was she simply prepared to step into her assigned role with grace? These questions underscore the intricate, sometimes invisible, networks of influence that define palace life. It's also worth considering the advisors' perspectives. Their loyalty is to the institution, not any individual. Their goal is to preserve the monarchy's integrity, maintain public confidence, and manage perception. That often means making decisions that may seem harsh or cold on a personal level. Meghan's removal from titles, from this perspective, was a strategic necessity, a recalibration designed to balance tradition with modernity, lineage with public engagement, and family cohesion with public optics. And yet, for Meghan herself, it feels like betrayal, exclusion, and personal erasure, a poignant reminder of how institutional priorities can clash with human emotion. Then there's the question of influence beyond the palace. The media, social commentators, and royal correspondents play an indirect but potent role in palace politics. Advisors anticipate reactions, journalists interpret leaks, and public sentiment is constantly monitored. Every decision made internally can ripple outward, creating pressure, controversy, or validation. Meghan's reassignment of titles was likely analyzed through this lens. How would it be reported? Who would defend it? Who would criticize it? And what narrative would dominate in the days and weeks following the announcement? The politics of perception are as real as the politics of authority, and the tension is heightened by contradictions within the palace itself. Some officials recognize Meghan's value as a modern, influential royal figure, capable of connecting with global audiences and advancing charitable initiatives. Others see her prominence as a challenge to hierarchy, a disruption of centuries-old norms. These conflicting viewpoints create a volatile environment in which decisions are not purely rational. They are deeply political, shaped by competing visions of what the monarchy should represent. Meghan is caught at the intersection of these competing forces, her influence both acknowledged and undermined simultaneously. What makes this situation even more intriguing is the layer of secrecy. Many palace decisions are deliberate, communicated carefully, and intended to appear seamless. But insiders hint at private machinations, strategic leaks, subtle recommendations, and even quiet pressure applied to key figures. Advisors may have quietly suggested timing that maximized impact, phrasing designed to mitigate backlash, or actions that ensured Lady Louise's transition appeared flawless. Meghan, meanwhile, is left to interpret these moves from a position of limited information, a common reality for anyone navigating the opaque structures of royal influence. There is also the psychological impact. Meghan is forced to reconcile personal ambition, pride, and identity with the institutional priorities of the monarchy. Every title, every engagement, every public acknowledgement carries emotional and strategic weight. The subtle redirection of authority to Lady Louise challenges not only her visibility, but her sense of purpose within the institution she joined. It is a loss felt both personally and publicly, a private blow with very public implications. And yet, the human story continues beneath the formalities. Meghan reportedly experienced a range of emotions: grief, frustration, disbelief, and even quiet determination. Close confidants describe her as reflective, strategizing for how to maintain influence, reshape public perception, and navigate her evolving role. Even as palace politics threaten to diminish her authority, she begins to consider avenues for impact outside traditional structures, a reminder that resilience and strategic thinking are hallmarks of her public persona. But just when Meghan is absorbing the full weight of palace politics, another layer is revealed: an internal memo, a whispered conversation, or perhaps an unexpected recommendation suggesting that the reassignment of titles may not be the final word. There are hints of alliances, subtle pressures, and strategic maneuvers that even Meghan may not fully understand yet. In the palace, nothing is ever straightforward, and the decision that seemed absolute may have deeper implications still to unfold. The result is a story rich with intrigue, strategy, and human emotion. Palace politics are not simply about ceremony. They are about influence, perception, and the subtle exercise of power. Meghan's removal from titles is a lens through which we can understand the intricate, often hidden, dynamics that shape the monarchy. And as the drama continues, it becomes clear, while Lady Louise ascends publicly, the true battle of influence, perception, and legacy is far from over. And as Meghan contemplates these hidden agendas, the tension escalates, because what appears to be a straightforward reassignment of titles may, in fact, be part of a more elaborate strategy, one that could change relationships, shift loyalties, and alter the very structure of authority within the royal family. And just like that, the seemingly complete story becomes a layered narrative of power, intrigue, and uncertainty, one that promises more twists, revelations, and personal reckonings than anyone outside these palace walls could imagine. How does the world react when a story this shocking lands in the public eye? When Meghan Markle's titles are quietly reassigned to Lady Louise Windsor, the ripple effects extend far beyond palace walls. Social media ignites. Headlines scream. Comment threads explode. And the public, always hungry for intrigue, begins to dissect every nuance of the situation, leaving Meghan and the monarchy to navigate a storm that is as unpredictable as it is relentless. Within hours, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook are filled with reactions. Some praise the monarchy's adherence to tradition, applauding the seamless transfer of titles to Lady Louise. Lineage matters, one commentator types. Tradition wins again. Another writes, framing the move as an expected, if dramatic, consolidation of royal authority. But as with any royal story, the conversation is never one-sided. Meghan's supporters flood the internet with outrage. How can this be fair? They ask. Titles earned through service and visibility should count for something. These digital debates reflect more than opinion. They expose the cultural tension between modernity and tradition, celebrity and lineage, merit and inheritance. Memes emerge, as fast-moving and sharp as any official announcement. Some portray Meghan dramatically reacting to her loss, juxtaposed with Lady Louise's calm, composed demeanor. Others highlight the irony of the situation, comparing centuries of protocol with the modern realities of social media-driven perception. It's a rapid-fire commentary, a blend of humor, critique, and judgment that underscores the unique power of digital platforms to shape narratives. Every post, like, share, and comment is part of a larger discourse that influences public perception and, indirectly, palace strategy. And yet, the intensity of reaction is amplified by contradictions. Meghan, once celebrated for bringing a fresh, modern perspective to the monarchy, is now framed as sidelined, replaced, or overshadowed. Lady Louise, by contrast, steps into roles designed to emphasize stability, continuity, and tradition. The narrative on social media reflects this contrast, often exaggerating emotions, motives, and consequences for dramatic effect. For Meghan, watching these discussions unfold can feel both alienating and deeply personal. Every post is a reminder of what she has lost, every comment a reflection of public judgment, and every viral meme a reframing of her identity. It's fascinating to observe how quickly social media transforms private decisions into global spectacle. While King Charles's decision was delivered quietly, the world's reaction is instantaneous and unpredictable. Hashtags trend, threads form, and the story gains momentum as different factions of the public weigh in. Some defend the monarchy, emphasizing lineage and duty. Others defend Meghan, highlighting her achievements, influence, and the perceived unfairness of the reassignment. The conversation becomes a cultural battleground, reflecting broader societal debates about tradition, gender, merit, and visibility. And there is another layer. The media. Royal correspondents, bloggers, and opinion writers seize the opportunity to analyze, interpret, and speculate. Articles dissect the timing of the announcement, examine the personalities involved, and contextualize the decision within centuries of royal history. Headlines range from sensational, Meghan ousted, titles reassigned, to analytical, the strategic logic behind King Charles's decision. Each piece adds fuel to the public conversation, framing perceptions in ways that can be as impactful as the decision itself. The irony is striking. Meghan, whose public persona has been shaped by advocacy, media engagement, and careful attention to narrative, now faces a media landscape where she is both subject and object. Social media amplifies emotion, speculation, and narrative, often with little regard for nuance. Every statement she has ever made, every public engagement she has led, is reinterpreted in light of this new development. Her identity as a duchess, a public figure, and a royal is reframed through the lens of public debate and digital discourse. Yet, the public reaction is not uniformly polarized. Some commentators acknowledge the complexity of the situation, recognizing the tension between tradition and modernization, lineage and achievement. They analyze Lady Louise's suitability for the roles she is assuming while empathizing with Meghan's private disappointment. These nuanced perspectives, while fewer in number, add depth to the conversation and highlight the multifaceted nature of public opinion. And then there's the emotional intensity of social media itself. Platforms thrive on immediacy, amplification, and engagement. Outrage spreads faster than analysis. Viral content, particularly memes, photoshopped images, or clever commentary, dominates attention. Supporters of Meghan and Lady Louise alike seize on these digital artifacts to reinforce their narratives. The palace must consider this, even if indirectly. Public perception, shaped and amplified by social media, can influence everything from ceremonial presentation to private strategy. Every like, share, and trending hashtag becomes part of a larger calculus of influence. The juxtaposition of private grief and public scrutiny is acute for Meghan. She experiences loss behind closed doors while simultaneously witnessing a global conversation that frames her story in real time. Every reaction online is a reflection of public perception, and every meme, comment, or viral post is a subtle challenge to her identity, credibility, and influence. The emotional toll is compounded by the speed and intensity of the digital age. There is no pause, no respite, no moment to process privately before the world weighs in. And yet, this storm of public reaction also reveals opportunity. Meghan has long been adept at navigating media narratives, using public attention strategically to highlight causes, initiatives, and personal perspectives. The reassignment of titles, while deeply personal, opens new avenues for influence outside traditional ceremonial roles. She can reclaim narrative control, reassert her public voice, and leverage the attention of social media to shape her legacy on her own terms. But the tension remains. Each public reaction, every viral discussion, and every trending topic serves as both a reminder of what has been lost and a gauge of how influence might be reclaimed. The digital world becomes a mirror reflecting both the monarchy's carefully constructed narrative and Meghan's personal struggle. It is a space where public perception, personal identity, and institutional authority collide, creating drama, intrigue, and emotional complexity at a scale never before possible. And just as Meghan begins to process these online reactions, a new element emerges. A sudden, unexpected leak, perhaps a private comment from an advisor, an image released strategically, or an internal memo made public, hinting that the story is far from over. Social media, which has already exploded, now becomes a conduit for secrets, revelations, and further twists, escalating the drama and raising the stakes even higher. Suddenly, what seemed like a straightforward reassignment of titles is revealed to be part of a larger narrative, one that intertwines personal emotion, family dynamics, institutional strategy, and public perception. The world may only see the surface, but beneath lies intrigue, complexity, and the raw human story of Meghan Markle navigating loss, power, and public scrutiny. And as the public conversation continues to escalate, Meghan realizes something critical. The world is watching, and every move, every statement, every appearance carries weight. In this digital age, where social media explodes at the speed of news, perception can become reality, and Meghan must